Friends, hi all. Today our story begins with a very interesting megapolis, where at a fairly young age, I already had a house and a car. I didn't have to work. I didn't have to worry about my education. I had the ability to travel around the world quietly or easily. Nothing was foreboding. I didn't have to worry about anything, like food or drink. I was constantly surrounded by a chauffeur and a bodyguard who allowed me to live my life in peace and happiness, with the benefits of escort and protection. But there is one very big problem here. I'm just a dog. Immediately after that, he drove his fancy car into town, after which he saw a rather beautiful girl with a rather good shape at a traffic light. What he immediately had his eyes rolling out, and he began to look at her very vigilantly. But the girl paid absolutely no attention to him, and in order to get him, the dog just climbed out the window and started barking. He immediately turned to her and said, "Hey, hi, beautiful girl." She turned around, after which he went on to say that they both should. But he didn't have time to say, after which they just abruptly started driving, as the traffic light turned green dots. But the girl was perplexed, asking, was that husky talking to me now? He was really furious because he started yelling at his driver, asking if he could drive normally. Did he really want to cut his head off? Couldn't he see that he was trying to hitch a ride with a girl right now? But without waiting for an answer, he was immediately struck in the head with his fist. The driver was a simple guy who said that if he spoke to strangers, like a human being one more time, he would just cut his hair off. By the way, let me introduce myself. My name is Awen. I'm a talented husky with demon blood in my veins. The guy who just hit him works as a full-time driver, and also just helps me out or something. It was actually his owner's name, Uni, and he's just a stupid idiot. At this point, it got dark outside, and the guys arrived at the fairgrounds. That is where they stopped their truck. At this point, they got out together. Being one of the most beautiful dogs in China, first of all, requires being on time at the bazaar, in addition to looking at all those beautiful ladies, as well as tasting the local delicacies. At that moment, the dog saw another beautiful girl he couldn't take his eyes off of, and he got a little embarrassed. They came to the city of Shenzhen, and this is not to be missed. He was immediately very surprised and started drooling. They came to the street of delicacies. Everything around was shining and in bright colors. There were so many beautiful girls walking down the street. "Yes, I can smell it," Iwan said, and was in anticipation. "There's rice in the breast with mushrooms, which looked quite appetizing. Admit it, how many of you would eat this right now? There's also the brilliantly cooked, lustrously fried pigeon, which looks just as appetizing. But that's not all, because just below that is the braised water bamboo. And as a real man who is at the head of this fantastic story, I will take it all in order to taste all these delicacies with my tongue." The dog was just mad with happiness, and realized that this was his vocation. He immediately ran forward, but was stopped by the leash that was tied to him, by which his master was holding him. At this point, he looked at the burger that was presented to him, telling him it would be his dinner. This made him very surprised and disappointed at the same time, for he had absolutely no way of expecting it. He looked again at his master and asked, "Is he kidding?" But he answered with a calm face that there really is a lot of Chinese food. There is lamb and steamed bamboo. There is steamed deer tail, fried duck, fried chicken, fried goose, and so on. The dog was very upset, picked up this burger and said they were in this town for the first time. And was he really going to get rid of him with the burger? He was very angry and upset, after which he started yelling and insulting the guy. At this point, it was still night, and it's worth noting that Uni is the most boring guy who has no money and no place to live. He's really wordless and insensitive. Right now, he's eating a burger and just keeps pulling his dog, who is apparently upset and doesn't want to communicate with him. But he doesn't care at all. He's walking down a dark alley, and he doesn't think about anything. looking at the lantern that lights his way and his sneakers. All this in the midst of a not-so-decent city. At this point, he still keeps sticking the dog behind him, but he stops for a second near the garbage cans, asking does he smell that smell exactly the same? Okay, but it wasn't like this guy from the village wasn't interested in anything. Immediately after that, blue dust particles began to appear from the urn, which seemed to be enchanted, but our hero had already passed by them, so he could not see them. But it was suspicious enough, you must agree. And now 2 new silhouettes began to appear in front of them. They seemed to be robbers who wanted to take something from them. But no, it was just a guy and a girl chatting and walking amicably, discouraging what should have gone into the deli street. The guy assured her that the seafood there was very tasty, to which the girl agreed. Suddenly, all of a sudden, they stopped as they saw something quite strange above. It was a red smoke curtain, right next to them. They were startled as suddenly, completely unexpectedly, this curtain grew larger and larger, after which something very strange, hand-like, appeared. It turned out to be a mushroom, very much like a man, but with a rather strange shape. His arms were very pumped up, and his face was perpetually unhappy about something. It's absolutely not something you want to see. At this point, the boys stood still and tried to get a good look at the monster, trying not to laugh and holding back their fear at the same time. And now, he was already standing in front of them. He was several times smaller, but he looked at the people with contempt and a very unhappy face. Of course, such behavior would not have elicited any normal reaction, so the guy immediately asked why that mushroom was hatching at him like that. But he continued to stand motionless and just stared at him with a very stupid and idiotic look that just showed with all his appearance that he wanted conflict. The boy was already angry, making it clear that he was addressing the mushroom and expecting the same response from him. The girl was already trying to just pick him up and leave. But suddenly, the mushroom spoke, saying the phrase "middle parted hair," from which the guy was surprised because he couldn't hear. But the mushroom had no problem repeating it, starting to shout as hard as he could, as if someone had made him very angry. At this point, the guy was also pissed off and started yelling back, asking what kind of idiot is this? Why is he here at night pretending to be a mushroom? Who does he want to scare this way? But at that moment, the mushroom turned into a rocket and flew toward the guy, from which he and his girlfriend were as shocked as possible and just stood there. Suddenly, a second later, from his shadow, the mushroom was seen hitting him right in the stomach, causing him to fall and get very badly hurt. Even the girl's lollipop fell out of her mouth, and the guy fell to the ground, breaking part of the pavement with himself. But that's not all. At this point, the mushroom continued to approach him aggressively, and the girl just kept crying, saying he was a murderer. But he said in a calm voice that he seemed to have killed someone. After which, without turning to her, he said that she had middle-parted hair just the same. Then the mushroom came up to her, just as she was about to fall, and asked her if she wanted to change her hair. To which the girl replied that she did not, and that she really didn't want to do it. But she hadn't had a chance to say it yet, when suddenly the mushroom turned red again and was furious. Everything around him began to glow, after which he aggressively asked if the girl was sure of her decision. But she didn't give him a normal answer, just asked him not to kill her. At that moment, a blow flew at her, and she hit the pavement as well. Then the mushroom came even closer to her and reached out his hand in her direction, trying to grab the girl. Suddenly, all of a sudden, a tin soda box flew into him. He was very surprised by this, and there were 2 silhouettes standing in front of him, our guy and a dog. The guy told the monster to get away from her, because this girl belonged to him. He was calm and looked like a superhero from the movies, and beside him stood an equally stylish dog. At this point, the mushroom even got upset, saying that these were people who didn't realize they were prying into their own business. But the dog ran up to him and told him not to dare touch that girl. Otherwise, let him not blame them for not warning him. He went on to say that they are masters who specialize in killing bad demons like him. If he doesn't know any better, he should give up. The response from the mushroom was immediate, after which the dog flew off into a distant garbage can at high speed, and the mushroom started screaming, asking if the demon-destroying masters were so weak. But the dog went on, saying that the master he was talking about was not him, from which the mushroom's face changed as much as possible, and he was perplexed. Immediately after that, a guy jumped on his head and started jumping on it with his feet, doing quite a bit of damage to him. After that, he jumped down with a calm face, as if nothing had happened, and just continued to sit there. They approached the girl, who began to recover from what had happened, and complained that she had a headache. At this point, the guy looked at her and realized that she was pretty well traumatized, so he would have to help her. He stepped closer to her as he suddenly sensed something amiss. It turns out that at this point the mushroom woke up and was very angry, saying that the guys didn't understand the situation they were in now. He's a mushroom monster who was born in the dark corners of a deli street, where no one looks. He remembered a situation that happened decades ago, when there was a cute little girl walking around all the time. His face changed very much at that moment. She liked to eat her food here, and every time she passed through here, she threw out the trash. Thus, on this fertile ground and formed it, the mushroom, which was born near the garbage cans. But the girl still kept feeding him garbage, tossing him leftovers of food and water. In this way, she fed him with her love. Finally, he grew so big and healthy because of his love. He cultivated to become a demon on purpose. But just as he was about to confess his feelings to her, she was embraced by a man with middle-parted hair. They were happy together. But even more outrageous was how that damn man with that haircut played with the girl's feelings. And so, as she held his hand, kneeling down, he just picked her up and traded her for another woman, saying he was just playing with her. It made her cry and say her heart broke, and he stood right behind her and saw it all. At that moment, his flowers fell to the ground, and no one saw the girl after that incident, since she killed herself because of this guy with middle-parted hair. When he said that, he started crying his eyes out, and his face was as distraught as possible. He knew that only the abominable middle-parted hair guy was to blame, and only him. At this point, our hero stood listening to this without any emotion, and the dog stood on its hind legs and was also ready for any turn of events. Mushroom then went on, saying that all these years after that, everyone who had that haircut had been grabbed by him here. He became as aggressive as possible and could barely contain his tears. His love died this way. So all people with middle-parted hair owe that girl even in the afterlife, so they will die with her. At this point, Yunai just stood there without emotion and said that absolutely no one should mess with his head. The mushroom was very surprised by this and started shouting that he was the king of mushrooms, god of mushrooms. The guy has been noting that he's been here for decades, so he must be familiar with the area, right? At this point, Mushroom smiled, saying that it didn't actually take that long. He was just bragging a little bit. At this point, the guy asked if he had seen 5 flavors before. That's right. He heard that old Lou likes Aunt Sang's 5th sister. Then he got very tense at such a question and started shouting, asking who he was and what kind of questions he was asking. Especially since he just stepped on his head too. Does he think he can fool him with that? And immediately threw himself into the fight. But the guy stopped him very easily by slapping him in the face. He said he was talking about the 5 flavors, not the 5th sister, which also made Mushroom look shocked and hold his cheek. At this point, the dog was just standing behind his master and watching the process. Suddenly the mushroom asked, "How dare Uni hit him?" Let him open his eyes and look closely, for in front of him stands the wicked great king of mushrooms, who has already eaten countless amounts of rotting food and garbage. The king of mushrooms. He once again emphasized his greatness and went on to say that 5th sister, Your mother. Who cares if you're fifth sister or sixth sister anyway? And he started laughing. But the guy just sighed, saying that means he doesn't know either. At this point, the mushroom came even closer and started screaming, saying that he knew about the guy being a piece of. And then, seconds later, the cook serves fried mushrooms on a plate and wonders where the guys could find such a large mushroom. But Husky didn't miss the point, and also said that the girl's mushrooms are also okay. At this point, she was surprised at what the dog only said and asked the owner again. But the latter simply said meow in response. And so, it's already night out again, and the guys drive on in their truck. Then ask to be allowed to introduce themselves again. UNI is the protagonist of this story. He's a great guy in general, but there was one incident that happened to mankind, and so he needs to find 5 flavors to put everything back in order. He is the type of man who specifically means what he says. He ate them and realized that this time the mushrooms turned out very tasty, and this genius must follow him for several reasons. Suddenly there was an alert on their phone that said they had to take an order. At this point, the dog got very excited and ran up to the phone screen to see if any hotties were caught this time. This is where our story begins. They continued to drive on and rock the car, and the dog kept asking to let him watch. This is the story of a country boy and a beautiful, talented dog. A dangerous demon-killing adventure. Demon for dinner. Afterwards, the team sat down and decided to sit down and have a drink, after a hard day's work. There was a huge sausage on the table, and a lot of food that was about to be cooked. A Chinese master was standing next to her, preparing delicacies, emphasizing that delicacies are extensive and profound. He then slapped his hand sharply on the table and pulled out his kitchen knife. Then planted the ingredients that they were making dishes that belonged to the Sichuan cuisine type, featuring unique characteristic, spicy, fresh, tender, and burning hot. Then he dumped them all into one large bowl and started stirring. But it is at least as good as anything fried, dried, boiled, or stewed, all of which can be prepared in more than 20 different ways. He went on to tell the story while he was busy preparing the dish. After all, if you really want to become a master of such complex cooking, you first have to become a master of your generation. It's not easy, because it takes the average person at least 20 years to do it. At that moment, a little boy named Shangguan Wuzai was listening to the whole story. After these words, 5 minutes later, the dish was already cooked and looked quite appetizing. And Chef Shangguan Wufa, who cooked it, said that the boy was lucky because it only took his father 16 years to do it. Immediately, the whole family rushed to quickly eat the food with their chopsticks while it was still hot, and the woman just walked up to him and hugged the man, saying that he was her very wonderful husband. But the little girl did not proceed to the meal. It was obvious that she was really interested in something, so her interest in food has receded into the background. She immediately approached her father, saying that she also wanted to learn how to cook. Everyone was a little shocked by this outcome, especially my father. He walked up to her and put his hand on her head, telling her that the kitchen was no place for a girl. He was serious, saying that until she was in the kitchen, she wouldn't be able to learn all the ins and outs of cooking. And that's not easy. After all, it's not just about knowing how to use fire and a knife, but also about her ability to judge other people's tastes and her ability to learn. He was as serious as possible, because this is a very difficult challenge in which physical endurance is also important. He turned his head in her direction and shouted slightly, saying that this is something only men can do. The girl's eyes lit up again as she listened to him as closely as possible. Her father kept telling her what she could have when she was older, but she didn't listen to him anymore and just snatched the cooking spatula out of his hands and ran. She immediately turned on the oven and began chopping the vegetables and other ingredients she needed for the dish. After that, she threw everything in a frying pan and began to gently fry over high heat. The father was really very surprised by this and did not disturb her in any way. After which, a few minutes later, the girl also brought to the table her already prepared dish, which really looked quite appetizing as well. The whole family began to stare at him and admire him. But the father was extremely focused and immediately took the chopsticks to test the dish. But he also noticed that the girl had really learned a lot from watching him cook. He decided to try the dish, but he noticed that taste is very important in cooking. The appearance may be good, but the taste is. Immediately afterwards, his face changed dramatically. He was maximally surprised and had a moment of euphoria, for it seemed that he had never tasted anything tastier than this in his life. Immediately, his wife went over to see if everything was okay. But he was shocked, his body immediately sweating because he never expected his daughter to be able to cook like that. After that, a pleasant smile appeared on his face, and drool fell to the ground, because it really is very, very tasty. He was as happy as possible and imagined he was in heaven, because he had never tasted anything so good in his entire life. A few years later, at an international gathering, with a huge number of participants among them, stood this girl who was very happy and gave her speech, where she was very happy that the year she turned 18, she received the highest award in the world of chefs. It was all about outdoing herself and creating the world's first food god recipe. This idea made her extremely happy. It was obvious that she was very much inspired and pleased by it. That's why she decided to travel to China. At this point, her family was very upset and lay on the floor, as they did not understand what they would have to eat when she left. After all, the girl had not even told her father about the ingredients for that very chicken. They really didn't want her to leave, but she stopped at the door and said she was going in search of the most valuable ingredients. Her eyes lit up. It was obvious that she knew what she wanted in this life. At that moment, the very truck in which our team was traveling was passing by the stadium. The dog suddenly began to ask the owner why he was so unreliable and began to ask if his brain had stopped working. Because he didn't understand where he had brought him. Because he had told him to go east, and he drove west. They were about to reach the city of Guangzhou. But Uni was undeterred and drove as calmly as possible as always, not giving off any emotion. But Husky went on to say that he had planned to spend time with the beautiful girls at the bar and stay there all night. But he had ruined everything, and now he was here with him. He also went on to reprimand him, saying that he had already told him about his knowledge of this world, and he was just a dog who had absolutely no worries about the road, so he could not be calculating enough. But he, Yunai, who takes this long road, must know how much money they lost by taking such a long route. Moreover, he also added that not only did they lose money, but they did not even have dinner. Furthermore, they could not even afford to pay for the fuel. He began to cry that he had lost his life with him, all of his 8 years of life. He really was so unlucky with him. At that moment, a new order appeared on the phone, which reported that the passenger was 1 kilometer away from them, at Biquan Dock Plaza. Yunai then replied to the dog that dinner would be there, but he was no longer surprised by anything and just said that he really didn't think anything worse could happen. Suddenly, all of a sudden, a pedestrian appears on an empty road and seems to be running straight toward the truck, which was approaching in his direction. And a few seconds later, the guys hit him at a low speed, which immediately makes them confused about what's going on. Even Uni expressed his emotions a little and was very surprised. After the collision, the pedestrians started running over them, asking do they not open their eyes as they drive? At this point, the dog was a little aggressive, as he sensed that something might be happening. He began to assume that it was just an accident scam arranged. But suddenly, the victim's family ran out from behind the bushes, the child and his mother, who ran up to him and started sobbing, saying that they had seen how they had hit him. They immediately asked if he was all right, because he was the backbone of their family. The guy was surprised as they started yelling at him how recklessly he was driving, and was shocked as he came at her husband in this way, after which she started grabbing her baby and crying. The guy then got out of the car and approached the pedestrian, saying he was in the way. But he started shouting, saying that he should give 50,000 yuan for medical care. You can pay in cash or by scanning the QR code, which he immediately gave him. If not, they will ask the others to come here as well. After these words, the guy grabbed the victim by the arm, who was bewildered, and began to ask what he was going to do. But he wouldn't listen to him and just started dragging him along the pavement as hard as he could, disregarding him and also his family, from which he was shocked, saying that he had so many brothers here, and so he panicked and suggested that he not refuse the offer, otherwise he would not spare him. After that, the guy walked a little farther with it and threw it very far out of the way, which made it twist. After that, there was no emotion on his face again. He just continued to be as calm as possible, at a time when his family was shocked by what had just happened. At this point, he got into his truck and drove on, and the family began to say that he was indeed a very good man, and wished him well. And the child added that may his business prosper. The dog was shocked that by following Uni, he would absolutely never have any luck in life, ever. But he was happy to be around him. Literally 5 minutes later, the guys were already on their way to their destination, for the order they had called for. The dog continued to be frustrated, but suddenly he saw the girl he had to pick up, and had to go to Biquan Dock Plaza. She opened the doors and immediately got into the car. At this point, she was very surprised and happy, since there was such a beautiful husky in the car. But the guy just kept driving, giving absolutely no emotion. At this point, the dog was enjoying the process, and would have been very happy if he could have stretched that pleasure. The truck kept going, and they pulled onto the bridge, after which the girl said that the entrance to the sea was approaching the southwest coast, where the freshest seafood was delivered every night. She was very pretty and said she was also coming here to get the seafood that had just come ashore. The guy finally said a phrase, and now he realized he was going a little wrong. Then the girl suggested that he just use the navigator in order to follow his instructions immediately. But the guy was very surprised since it was the first time he had heard of it. At this point, it was already dark outside, and the moon began to appear around the palm trees. The van arrived at its destination and parked without turning off its lights and saying, "Here they are. Things seem to be going very well indeed." The girl said goodbye to them and told the guy to remember to use the navigator next time, so he wouldn't take the wrong route again. Husky looked at her again and said that she was indeed a beautiful, intelligent, and gentle woman. He grumbled one more time and turned to the guy, saying that such a long trip today must have brought them a lot of money, right? And so they should treat themselves to it. He immediately began to imagine what awaited him, and suggested that Uni eat seafood together. The Shenjing oyster are very famous here. He began to drool. He continued, saying that it was a very soft and delicate dish, and it was something like the soft and warm body of a beautiful woman. But again, a burger appeared in front of him, which Yunai had already eaten, and the dog was also supposed to eat it with him. At that moment, a can from the drink fell to the ground, and some guys started discussing the food at this restaurant, saying that even the sea fish cooked here can be hard to swallow, and they still missed the seafood at the old henna restaurant. His friend continued to drink and said, "You have to bear with it, as Heller restaurant has now turned into a ghost beach." This information made Uni very wary and surprised as he continued to listen to their conversation. "Why don't I take you there?" "Forget it. Who dares go into that hole at night? That place turned into a wasteland long ago." At that moment, even the dog became alert and surprised, and then the boys looked at each other to see if they had heard that. It used to be that even late at night the lights were on in this restaurant, and there were really a lot of cars parked near it. But now it's completely empty. There's not a single car. The sand is blown off the letters that hang from the roof. It has completely turned into a ruined space that looks like an abandoned building, which no longer attracts visitors in any way. But there were hangouts at the restaurant, and everyone was very happy and having a good time. V. She took the oysters with her chopsticks, and the chef seemed to be some kind of demon, because he started smiling and laughing a lot, saying that as long as you eat a bite, you will remain here forever. But the girl couldn't know that and just went on eating. All of a sudden, the guys came up to Uni and asked if he came from out of town, because in that case, it's totally normal that he hadn't heard about it before. He immediately went up to them with his dog and asked what had happened on the beach then. It turned out that the Old Hearer was the most popular seafood restaurant in town, and it was very crowded every night. And all because the local seafood was very popular. A lot of tourists came here because of the reputation of the institution. But just a few years ago, there was a very big fire that completely destroyed the place. The restaurant survivor said he saw monsters lurking and then ran amok. Later, from time to time, there were many rumors from missing tourists and about people seeing ghosts. However, one very important guy hid this information, but shortly afterwards he also disappeared. Yunai continued to listen to this without any emotion, and the dog got a little wary, after which the guys went on, saying that the hotel was also becoming increasingly gloomy, to the point where all that was left was a rotting building that had been destroyed by fire. Later, someone said they saw the hotel lit up late at night. They also shuddered, and the bald guy also remarked that such a thing made his hair stand up. Yunai listened to all this and wasn't even surprised, but they also went on to say that all these spirits are like urban rumors that everyone will eventually forget. At this point, the guy turned around and turned to his dog, saying that they needed to go, and he also said that this time the man was using illusions. And the dog began to think about the girls as well, noting that it seemed to be a bit unlucky this time. But she decided to smell the dish first, then set it aside a bit, turning to the owner of the establishment. She had come a long way to taste the freshest seafood, but these clams he gave her all seemed to be dead. He immediately clenched his fist and decided to clarify again aggressively what she had said. Does she really think they use dead mollusks to trick customers? After that, he asked if the girl tasted them and started smiling, but she was perplexed and something alerted her. After which she was ready to leave, but realized she was sitting in the middle of an abandoned building with only one client, who was also sitting in a draft. She looked back sideways, but the chef came up to her and said, "Did she taste the dish?" But she realized things were bad, for she had encountered an evil spirit, which made her very frightened, after which she said she had not yet tried. The monster then came even closer to her and grabbed her sharply by the chair with his hand, and began to tell her in her ear that why did she think they were dead if she hadn't even tried. After all, they really hate it when they want to be slandered. It was Sea Monster's second brother. At this point, they realized that other brothers had also appeared and said that now was the time to eat. The girl was very frightened and stretched her arms forward and pretended to be blind, saying that she had been blind since childhood, so her sense of smell and taste were naturally heightened. She was almost crying by now, and went on to say that she had also recently contracted a terrible and deadly infection, which was now in its advanced stage. So she came here tonight just to taste some of this legendary delicious seafood. At this point, Sea Monster's second brother came up to Sea Monster's second brother and said that the girl might be infected, so it seems they can't eat her. But the girl began to pretend to cry, complaining about her short life. At that moment, she was thinking how she could survive and escape. Luckily for her, she was driving today with a wonderful driver who is obsessed with ghosts, and whose truck the navigator right now led to her destination. And so, they arrived at that abandoned restaurant. Dog immediately pulled out his glasses and realized that now it was time to play BGM for our demon-slaying master. He just felt sorry for this sweet, gentle, and beautiful girl. Her attractive long legs would be someone else's food, which made him very sad. The girl stood in the kitchen and pointed out that the first thing important in seafood is to keep the flavor fresh. So she continued by saying that it was imperative to use only the freshest and freshly brought from the sea seafood. At this point, two other brothers stood near her and greeted the guests. One of them didn't understand. Could her infection spread to them? They say the sea creatures, can easily get infected. To which the chef said they needed to be more careful. The girl continued talking and cooking, taking garlic. She specified that it is the best partner for seafood. We can make garlic paste by chopping garlic and mixing it with sesame oil. All she could think about was that she had to find a way to distract these monsters somehow and escape. At this point, they became very tense and wary as Uni and his dog came in the door and asked them to meet the new guests. The guy was as usual without any emotion and just ate his burger. And here they are, standing in this empty place, looking at what's happening right now. Suddenly the dog raises his glasses and sees that the girl is okay, because he was so worried about her. She was very surprised and happy at the same time. At this point, the chef tensed up and was very aggressive, clarifying, do they really know each other? But the girl was glad to see who it was who came to her, and then she wondered if a dog had really just said hello to her. What did she encounter today? The chef immediately extended his tentacles and was surprised to see that it was a talking dog. He immediately looked like a demon, saying that he and he were very much alike. But that was the girl they were attracted to. But he interrupted them, saying that they are really different from them because they are monsters, and they are exorcist masters. After which they started laughing, saying that it was really impressive, saying that in that case they were exorcist masters of destruction. At this point, the dog was as aggressive as possible, and our hero just kept eating his burger, showing absolutely no emotion. Immediately after that, a wall started flying toward them, and the girl just watched the process and was shocked. Immediately, completely unexpectedly, a wall fell off near her, which almost nailed her. She was very lucky that she was able to escape in time. At this point, the monster saw that the girl was obviously not blind, but she dared to lie to them. It made him furious. But the girl said in her excuse that she only wanted to create a book, so she would not participate in their war. But the monster was as angry as possible. He shouted and said that they had entered his territory, so no one from her would leave today. But the dog said not to worry, for they are not weak at all. At this point, the dog immediately began to get hit, which he tried to dodge. It turns out that it was another one of the three brothers who decided to attack him, but the dog laughed very hard, asking if he really thought it would be that easy to catch him. But then immediately he was hit, and a second later the dog flew off into the wall, from which even the girl was as shocked as possible. Immediately after that, the dog came out of the wall and asked the girl not to worry. He was fine, and thanks to him being here, demons can't touch her. But the girl turned to him and asked, "Is he really a demon as well?" At this point, the monster turned to our guy and said that now it will be his turn, after which he would immediately spit poison at him. At the guy finishing his burger, easily dodged it, showing absolutely no emotion. Suddenly, that monster became as aggressive and ran at him in battle. But Yunai did not care about this at all. He immediately caught him by the tentacles and just broke them apart, which shocked everyone. They stopped and didn't understand what was going on, so they started talking among themselves and came to the conclusion that this guy had some special skills. And he just kept shaking his hand at this point, so it didn't feel very good. And so the brothers decided to guess what those skills were. The most important one was as aggressive as possible, as he charged his brother for training for over 20 years. Has he forgotten all the strong men he knocked out? That's not to mention the fact that their older brother can control everything with illusions. That's why he asked, what is he afraid of? After the brother got enough motivation, he realized that he was a martial arts master and was not afraid of anything at all. So he could just run to attack, which he did. And so he runs up to the guy who keeps finishing his burger, and the most important one of them just starts looking at it and laughing as he realizes that this skill is totally invincible. Suddenly, our hero just takes his burger in his mouth and frees himself with 2 hands, after which he gets into a fighting stance. Immediately after the monster had come within sufficient distance, the guy started hitting him with his hands. He was shocked and fell with all his might on the pavement. At this point, the monster who was watching all this was very surprised, and the attacker took quite a bit of damage and fell to the knockout. And the main one of them ran up to his brother and started hugging him, asking why he was dying this way. And at this point, he begins to cry very hard, turning to another brother with tears in his eyes, saying that he died thanks to a criminal. At this point, he ordered that the guy need to come to his senses, using his illusions and abilities to end them. At this point, he was a little surprised and asked what he should do. But his brother was very aggressive, saying he was too slow to respond because they had already moved on to the part where their third brother was dead. But his brother still couldn't believe what he was saying about garlic being the best partner for seafood. At this point, he slapped the table sharply and asked if he had been eaten. He knew it was delicious. He immediately became very aggressive, and he also had tears, for he had really wanted to taste it for a long time. Suddenly, the most important of them told his older brother that he hadn't been eaten. At that moment, he began to glow a purple flame, turning to the boys. At this point, the girl and the dog were also perplexed as to what was going on, and began complaining that they were getting very, very hot. But the older brother was as aggressive as possible and started yelling at people asking how dare they eat his brother. At this moment, and the girl was in euphoria, and was very happy. She had even undressed already, and did not understand how there were such expensive ingredients. And at this point, the dog was also very surprised that there were a huge number of beauties near him. He did not understand why they were all here. At this point, the most important brother realized that this is a super illusion, which is called a happy paradise. He began to smile very much, because he understood that this would plunge all the enemies into their most lustful desires, from which they would completely lose their guard. But the guy just kept eating his burger and totally ignored it. This made the monster very surprised and angry at the same time. He absolutely could not understand why he did not react to it. Doesn't he have anything happy at all? At this point, he continued to eat burger, and the monster yelled at him, asking how dare he eat his third brother. At this moment, the guy showed absolutely no emotion at all, and the monsters kept yelling at them, said that such vile people like them should be turned into food and destroyed. As suddenly, the older brother of the sea monster came up to him and said that he had messed with the wrong person, as he was the owner of these here. He pointed to the girl and the dog, who were in euphoria, absolutely did not want to do anything, because there was already absolutely no one left to save him. At this point, the monster immediately began to attack him, telling him to die with them, trying to avenge his third brother. At this point, the monster knocked the burger out of his hands, which already made the guy really show emotion, after which the burger fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Yunai looked at the monster and was furious as his burger fell right out of his hands. He immediately looked at him and warned him with a disgruntled look that he had ruined his lunch. After that, the dog and the girl went on a journey of euphoria, after which the husky said that they were just friends, and the girl at this point dreamed that it really is her favorite snowflake, wagyu beef, in front of her. While they were both in delusions of euphoria, two monsters were standing in front of his brother, and one of them was smiling really hard. Yunai came closer to him and said with a completely serious face that he wanted his life, because he had already taken it and ruined it. At this point, the monster immediately got angry and defiantly spat on his burger, then immediately stepped on it and smeared it with his foot. The guy calmly watched it all. The monsters laughed and cheered from the situation. One of them, who was the culprit, stuck his tongue out and kept laughing loudly, telling the guy to get up warm first and then eat it. It did not last long. Immediately after this phrase, a fist flew at him, after which the monster flew back with all his might into the sea. He absolutely could not have expected it, turned around and continued to shout at the guy, at the moment when there was already an imprint of his head in the wall. So you can imagine what kind of force the blow was. But the guy didn't stop his attention there, and immediately started swinging his arm with all his might to hit him in the head one more time. At that moment, the monster felt the guy completely. Absolutely do not understand how this could happen. At that moment, it hit him with such force that the monster just flew apart. It was obvious that they definitely did not expect such a thing. At that moment, the most important of them was just scared, because never before had anyone been able to resist them like that. All the more so he met people. So the most important one was as shocked as he could be that Big Brother had been wiped out. He immediately fell to the ground and hit his back, sprawled all over the surface. And then a second later, the huge monster turned into a small pebble, which was as unassisted as possible. At this point, the dog continued to chew on his t-shirt. You can imagine that the girl next to him. So he asked her not to stop, and the beautiful girl who came to the restaurant. Right now, her eyes opened, and she did not understand what just now happened. At this point, the steps toward the Big Brother continued. It was the last monster, the second brother, who was the most important among them. He immediately fell to his knees and began to cry for his brother. As suddenly as a second later, a smile appeared on his face. Because he was finally dead, he knew for sure that he was not to be hoped for. He was also very angry with him because he was suppressing his powers with his illusion. Well, Yunai had already decided to look at the remaining monster as well, who kept telling him that he should be in charge in these waters. Then he stood up and said proudly that he was the Sea Lobster King. Immediately afterwards, he smiled very much, thanking them for finally releasing his weapon again. After that, he immediately swung it around and gave it a very hard blow that blew the walls next to him apart. At this point, he was very aggressive and continued his story, saying that these pollutants from the ocean continued to enter his body. If Lord Aoyan hadn't helped him turn into a demon, he would have died like the rest of the vile creatures. After he told it all, our hero still had absolutely no emotions. He didn't care. After becoming a demon, he finally set a goal for himself. He wanted to take over Union Land for the people to live in the ocean and experience their battle as well. This made the girl and the dog a little surprised. Next, he went on to tell about his claws, which are called God and Demon Slayer. And as the name implies, God can kill God and devil can kill devil. It can easily penetrate absolutely everything. He was very aggressive and started running into battle, saying that he had once destroyed over 30 cruise ships with them. Yunai just stood there and looked at the whole situation, completely unresponsive. And then comes the moment of collision, in which the guy just stands still and stops the blow of his claw with his finger. He was just as calm and cool as possible when the monster was perplexed, for he had hoped to strike a critical blow. But the guy just asked if he knew about 5 flavors. It was exactly the same question he asked the very first monster, to which Sea Lord said he had only heard of the 6 flavors of the Chinese foxglove pill, and then ordered the guy to die. But the Lord simply took and threw his claws aside with tremendous force. The Lord absolutely did not expect this, and fell forward, and the guy was already standing completely behind him. At this point, Lord continued to laugh and feel his strength as suddenly, his claw fell off exactly halfway and fell to the ground with tremendous force. When Sea Lord saw this situation, he was upset and frightened because he could not believe that his claw had just been broken into pieces. The monster was perplexed and began to panic because he couldn't guess what kind of magical weapon Uni was now waving so skillfully. The Lord was very scared and asked only not to say that it was the celestial weapon, Demon Slayer Blade. But after that, he started laughing in a panic, saying that it was totally unimpressive and that the guy was just borrowing that power. After which he became very aggressive, saying it was nothing compared to the fact that he was much stronger than his 2 previous brothers. But the guy just put on his hood and didn't pay attention to it, after which Sea Lord became as aggressive and robot-like as possible. He was proud to have the strongest armor, Dragon thorns. After all, even missiles can't hurt him when he's wearing this armor. After all, not only does it protect against all attacks, but it also reflects damage. He turned to the guy, telling him that even his weapons couldn't penetrate this armor. So he suggested that he just not waste any more strength if they already understood everything. But Yunai didn't care. At that moment, he turned toward him, which the monster could not have expected, and then ran sharply in his direction, which scared him very much, saying that he had warned the guy not to waste his strength. He could not believe that someone was flying at him, without fear in his eyes, so he tried again to stop the guy, asking if he didn't understand him. After all, he had to run away from him, and so he ran up to him and hit him with his fist with all his might. Sea Lord was very much afraid and begged him not to come any closer. You could see how scared he was. But there was no time to step back, and the boy's fist flew with all his might into the monster, attacking it in the stomach. Then, a minute later, there were 3 seafood dishes on the table, waiting for just the right moment. At this point, the dog said it was just a little show, and the girl was really safe by his side. It looks like she cooked those seafood for them. Then the guy turned to them, saying that it was necessary to go on. The girl looked away from them and saw the dog asking why Yunai was using the blade to suppress demons again. After all, he needed to conserve his powers. At this point, she thought to herself that the guy was really very strong and turned to them, saying that they also hadn't eaten anything yet today. So she pulled out the seafood she received and smilingly said she had a great idea. She immediately pulled out her cooking utensils and began chopping ingredients, stirring and cooking the food. The guy and his dog watched the whole thing and were really excited about how smart she was and how she cooked. The dog immediately noticed that she was not only beautiful, but she was also smart, because she was really a very good cook. She would be perfect for him. He immediately wanted to marry her. She smiled and said that with the limited ingredients, she could only make this, and also she had never tasted this kind of food before. It was steamed lobster and fried lox. Stir-fry the shell with minced garlic and steam it. The team was shocked and couldn't figure out what that smell was. Geoduck sashimi paired with wasabi soy sauce. Immediately cook after slaughtering. Peel the freshest part in boiling water and cut it into thin slices. It was just so beautiful and delicious. For once, the husky was glad that dog life was no longer failing him. At that moment, the girl held out her hand and said that there was still one last dish she wanted to show. It was sham tsang iced oyster. This special seafood dish has been famous in Shenzhen for ages. Pure oysters paired with lemon juice. This could be the freshest way to eat seafood. Everything looked as beautiful and appetizing as possible. Even I would like to eat it all now. After which the girl asked the guys to try it, adding that it was the first time she had ever cooked monsters. The girl and her dog immediately began sampling the food, and within seconds were in euphoria, roughly the same as her father was when he first cooked. Dog definitely couldn't hide his emotions either, because the taste of this oyster is like being kissed by a hot beauty in a hot tub. He even said it was much better than the illusions that were before him. Even the girl's eyes lit up, and she realized that this taste was really different. She immediately wondered if there was something special about demon meat. At this point, the dog jumped on Uni and said that he should definitely try it, because he would definitely like the taste. But he didn't care. He just worried that they were about to run out of gas if they didn't get their order in time, and headed for the exit. At this point, the dog pounced on him and told him to eat it immediately, shoving it in his mouth. Afterwards, when the guy had finished his meal, he and the girl began to watch the process, asking how he liked the dish. Wasn't it delicious? Suddenly, Yunai's eyes first glowed a bright yellow color. It seemed like his whole life flew in front of his eyes. He began to shine like a saint, the glare shining off him like lightning. Thus manifested his euphoria, from which the girl was as surprised as possible. The guy showed some emotion for the first time, then took another bite and cried, asking if it tasted salty. He kept crying and didn't understand why her food tasted good. At this point, the girl was a little surprised and said she added some soy sauce. The dog was even more surprised, for it was strange that the boy's sense of taste had returned. On the second day, they were also riding in their truck all together and missed a pig that was crossing the road. The girl was curious, so she asked the guys if they were destroying demons along the way. "And how many more demons will we come across?" She was very much impressed by this, because she didn't understand what meat of such a high-class monster could taste like, and that was exactly the ingredient she was looking for. From now on, she will travel with them as she plans to create the world's first monster cookbook. But the guy was a bit unhappy about the idea and said "but." But the girl made it clear that no buts, and started laughing, along with the husky. Meanwhile, the traffic light had already turned green, and the girl immediately asked, "Don't the guys have any money for food and gas?" So she would take care of the food on the way and kept smiling. She also added that they would split all their gasoline spending equally, 50-50, so she just suggested they move on. At that moment, some very rich girl was walking down the street, who really stood out very much against the poverty and standard of living of the locals. One of them asked her for alms to help him because he had been starving for days. But she defiantly kicked his crockery with her foot, with all her might, and ordered him to get lost, because it was none of her business that he hadn't eaten in days. Suddenly, the beggar picked up his plate and just wanted to explain something to her, saying that he really hadn't eaten in days, and then he started laughing and his eyes lit up pink. It also seemed to be some kind of demon who had come to this town to pretend to be unholy. At this point, it was getting dark and a crow landed on the roof of the building, watching the situation. It turns out he was already able to destroy that rich girl, because the only thing near him as he finished his meal was that rich lady's coat and shoes. When he was already full, other monsters also appeared from around the corner, watching from the side and reporting that their boss was eating meat again, and also letting him know that they had some news. Immediately afterwards, they ran up to him and started laughing, adding that the broth did smell really good. "Spit it out." After which the green monster reported that he ought to go to the south. The guys in Shenzhen found his traces. His hands immediately reached for the broth, but the boss immediately took them away, adding not to tell the other demons where they were, because he didn't want others ahead of him. He explained himself by saying that the god who fell into dire straits and lost his power. This is a great opportunity. His eyes immediately lit up, because if he ate it, it would be equal to 100 lifetimes worth of cultivation. Right after that, the crow heard enough and flew away toward the power line. After which, she turned into another monster with superpowers, who stood and analyzed the situation. At this point, the truck and crew had already arrived at the right place, where they discussed on the way that fate is full of misfortune, and the guy really didn't expect a very beautiful girl, Miss Shangwen Wuzai, to step over and go with them on their first trip with them. Meanwhile, the guy took her to his room and showed her where she would sleep. And the dog didn't understand why the guy was bringing her to a room where someone had even stolen the bathroom shower head. He was worried, all because such a beautiful lady would not be able to take a shower because of it. At this point, the guy asked, why did they only steal the shower head thought? But the dog said it looked pretty treacherous. But he asked not to worry, because he really had a great idea, as a gentleman would never leave a girl in an awkward position. So he reported that he had booked a luxurious first-class hotel room in Shenzhen in advance. It was a high-class hotel, which included two great features. One was Cantonese cuisine. They rely on steamers to cook. And the second was the hot spring with a sauna. He was very happy about this and wanted to share the same sentiment with others, adding that this was the only hotel where both men and women could be in the hot spring. The girl was also thrilled by this, because she hadn't had a chance to explore their local classics since she'd come here. And the guy just closed the doors behind them, not showing much emotion. At this point, he told the husky that he threw the nozzle away on purpose, but he turned around and asked him to be quiet, because doesn't he want to end up in a luxury hotel with a beautiful girl? He was surprised and asked how much money he was hiding from him, because how could he afford to book a hotel room? But the dog just didn't know what to tell him. So the guy said he would use the rest of the money to pay for the fuel, to which he agreed. At this point, they went to the restaurant, which was in the hotel, and the girl was delighted with the dishes they served. After all, she had no idea that the dishes of the classic Cantonese cuisine in this hotel were so delicious. She also added that this prime rib was steamed, but there was no change. It turned out quite tasty, which is why she will ask the chef for advice later. Husky also watched the whole process and enjoyed it. Immediately afterwards, the dog said that after trying first steam, one should immediately enjoy second steam later as well. And the girl added, saying that there's a saying where you have to try the whole world to be able to cook it later, from which she was delighted. At this point, he looked at his watch and was surprised because it was 8 o'clock. So he was going to his room, but the girl stopped him, asking if he wouldn't even stay to try the hot springs here. But the dog answered for him, saying that now he would be looking at something else, which made the girl very surprised. And so, the guy sat down in his room and started watching a love soap opera, of which only the phrase is heard, "I gave you a love letter," describing the time we were in love. Why, after the happiness of being together, only the bitterness remains? And so, he started watching his wife's counterattack series. At this point, Uni had really very positive emotions. It seems that this is what really pleased him during this period of his life. But the girl stayed with the dog and went together in the direction of the warm springs, from which the dog was very happy, because he knew that the long-awaited moment was very close. He imagined how soon he would be able to be in contact skin to skin with a beautiful girl. Such thoughts immediately made him drool on his lips, and he hit a crossbar at high speed, which he failed to notice. But at the entrance there was a little problem, as a security guard showed her that it was forbidden to enter the institution with animals, and once again pointed her to the sign that hung on the wall. The husky was startled and bewildered, but a second later he was somehow pleasantly surprised as the guard hit him with a stick, after which he got up on his hind legs. Immediately after that, he stepped away from the girl, because she realized that it looked like his plans had been ruined, so she would go first. Meanwhile, it was already quite dark outside. The stars were covering the sky completely, and the girl was sitting in the warm waters and enjoying this beautiful process alone, since absolutely no one wants to come at this late hour. She was lying there, enjoying the process, when suddenly she heard some incomprehensible rustling. Our husky immediately appeared in front of her, which apparently scared her a lot. She could not understand how he got here, but he reported that he climbed in through the dog hole. How could this door stop him? His eyes immediately lit up, and he began to enjoy this paradise, jumping into the water toward the girl, which made her a little surprised and come out of the water, adjusting her swimsuit, which accentuated her figure so well. At this point, the dog was also very surprised, asking the girl why she decided to wear a bathing suit. It was a strange question, and she asked, "Don't all hot springs wear bathing suits?" But Husky added that he had seen movies where the hot springs were mixed and everyone trusted each other. To which the girl got a little angry, asking what kind of movies was this creep watching? But the dog was no longer thinking with his head. He was ruled by his instincts. He did not care at all. The girl had to kiss him because he spent a lot of money on her, after which he began to molest her. And so, the girl had also already closed her eyes and opened her mouth, but the guys were already sitting and steaming in the sauna, and the dog was already tied up and kept wondering, was it really necessary? The girl looked at him and decided to ask who Yunai was, and how did he become so powerful? But the dog just snorted and asked why she thought he was powerful. He also went on to say that she would have to spend less time with him after she married him, but he still dared to tell his story. Yuni was once able to ascend to heaven and descend to earth. Powerful he was in general. He could be called the king of the previous generation. We can see how he really shines and stands out against all these demons. But unfortunately, he was framed and chained by the gods in demonic chains and left alone on the sacred mountain for thousands of years. He fought and tried to get out of them. Indeed, he was ready to go to hell rather than stay in the demonic chains. And thanks to his help, through many trials, he was reborn again on Earth. But it's not all that simple, because as a result, he also lost much of his power and memory, along with the loss of many senses. The girl guessed that the guy had no sense of taste for just that reason. No wonder he reacted that way. After all, the last time it was strange, he actually tasted salty when he tasted her food. The girl must have excellent cooking skills, but she needed to solve this puzzle, so she asked, "So what is the 5 flavor they keep looking for?" To which Husky said that only 5 flavor could bring things back to the way they were before. And he went back to his story where Yunai was standing and talking to higher powers. They reported that there was only one way to regain the power and memories he had lost earlier. He needs to find the 5 flavors that are scattered over the earth and remember all their sensations. The guy then had already partially and lost his emotions, but the spirits continued, saying that they would wait for his return and send him to a new life. But also the dog clarified that they don't really know what it is. 5 flavor. So they really need to find out first.